"You're no daughter of mine," my dad screamed, his voice slamming against the mahogany walls of the high-end law office. He sneered at me, clutching what he believed was the key to my late uncle's multi-million-dollar business empire. For 15 years, my biological parents treated me like trash, throwing me out on the street when I was just 16. But the moment my wealthy Uncle Charles passed away, they swarmed like vultures, desperate to claim a fortune they never earned. They thought they had won. They thought they could push me into a corner and take everything. But as my dad threw the forged papers onto the desk, demanding his payout, the estate lawyer picked them up. I watched the color completely drain from the lawyer's face as he froze solid, his eyes widening in pure horror. Stick around until the very end to find out what was actually written in that file, and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far our story has traveled. My name is Charlotte, and I am 31 years old. Standing in this cold, sterile law office, wearing my military dress uniform, I look like a woman who has everything under control. But if you want to understand how I got here, we have to look back exactly 15 years, to the night my life was completely shattered. I was only 16 when my biological parents decided I didn't fit into their vision of a perfect family. They were obsessed with status, appearances, and pouring every single resource into my younger brother's future. To them, I was just an expensive inconvenience. One rainy Tuesday, after a minor argument about my college savings, my dad threw a duffel bag at my feet, opened the front door, and told me to get out. They cut me off completely, leaving a terrified teenager stranded on the street. That was the night my Uncle Charles saved me. Charles was my dad's estranged brother, a highly successful, eccentric businessman who saw right through my parents' toxic vanity. The moment he heard what happened, he drove down, picked me up, and took me into his home. For the next 15 years, Charles didn't just give me a roof over my head, he gave me a real life. He treated me like his own daughter, mentored me in business, and supported my decision to join the military. We built an unbreakable bond rooted in trust, respect, and unconditional love. He was my true father, and his guidance shaped me into the strong woman I am today. The phone call came at 2 o'clock in the morning, a sharp metallic ring that shattered the quiet safety I had known for 15 years. Uncle Charles had suffered a massive, sudden heart attack in his study, the very room where we had spent countless evenings discussing strategy, life, and the future. By the time I reached the hospital, he was gone. The devastating weight of losing the only man who had ever truly loved and protected me felt like a physical blow, leaving me completely anchored in grief. Yet, the funeral flowers were still fresh when the atmosphere changed from mourning to cold calculation. My biological parents and my brother, people who hadn't spoken a single word to me since the night they threw me out on the street, suddenly materialized at the wake, wearing expressions of carefully manufactured sorrow. Their synthetic sympathy didn't even last until the end of the reception. Standing by the refreshment table, my dad leaned in, his voice dripping with false concern as he whispered that it was time to talk about practical arrangements. Within minutes, the mask dropped entirely, revealing the pure greed underneath. Right there in the house where Charles had raised me, my parents and brother began openly dividing up his multi-million-dollar corporate empire, his luxury real estate, and his private investments. They spoke with an arrogant certainty, completely ignoring my presence and laughing about how the entire family bloodline was finally getting the wealth it deserved. They truly believed that Charles's sudden passing was their ultimate payday, and they were ready to erase me completely. The morning sun cut sharply through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the high-end downtown law office, casting long, dramatic shadows across the polished mahogany conference table. My biological parents and my brother swaggered into the room as if they already owned the building, their footsteps echoing with unearned confidence. They were dressed in immaculate designer clothes, luxury suits and expensive dresses that I knew, For a fact, they had bought on credit weeks ago in anticipation of this massive payday. They took their seats on one side of the table, whispering excitedly among themselves and radiating a smug, untouchable arrogance. To them, this meeting was nothing more than a formal coronation, a brief legal hurdle before they walked out as multimillionaires. I sat completely silent across from them, wearing my crisp military dress uniform, my hands folded calmly in my lap. I purposefully kept my expression passive and heartbroken, letting them believe I was entirely defeated by my grief. My dad leaned forward, looking down his nose at me with a patronizing sneer that made my skin crawl. He casually adjusted his gold watch and told me that while I wasn't entitled to anything, they might consider throwing a few $1,000s my way out of the goodness of their hearts just to help me get by. My brother laughed quietly, dismissing my 15 years of loyalty and hard work by Uncle Charles's side as if it meant absolutely nothing. They treated me like an invisible outsider, completely blind to the fact that their absolute certainty was about to become their ultimate downfall. The atmosphere in the room turned entirely hostile as my dad lost patience with the legal formalities. He reached into his leather briefcase, pulled out a thick document, and slammed it violently onto the mahogany table. "You're no daughter of mine!" he shouted, his voice echoing off the walls as he glared at me with pure hatred. "You're just a parasite who crawled into my brother's life, but your little game is over. These are Charles's amended partnership papers, signed right before he died, granting my business full control over everything. Hand over the estate assets immediately." My mother and brother smiled triumphantly, convinced they had just delivered the final crushing blow. I didn't flinch. I slowly stood up, smoothing the front of my military uniform, and looked my dad dead in the eye. The room fell into a sudden, heavy silence as I spoke in a calm, icy whisper. "You really shouldn't have done that, Dad. I know exactly what schemes you've been pulling for the last year, and you just walked right into a trap." Before he could yell back, the heavy glass door clicked open. The estate lawyer walked into the room holding a bright red file containing the true, final legal documents. My dad arrogantly shoved his partnership papers into the lawyer's hands, demanding he verify them. The lawyer glanced down, began to read, and froze, completely solid. I watched in absolute silence as the color drained entirely from his face, his eyes widening in pure horror. The silence in the room was deafening as the lawyer stood entirely motionless, his hands visibly trembling as he gripped the papers my dad had so confidently slammed down. My dad's triumphant smile began to falter, replaced by a twitch of nervous impatience. "Well?" my dad demanded, leaning across the table. "Tell her it's over. Tell her everything belongs to us now." The lawyer finally looked up, but he didn't look at my dad. He looked at me with an expression of profound shock. "Mr. Vance," the lawyer said, his voice dropping to a strained, hushed whisper. "These partnership papers you just handed me, they aren't just invalid. They match the exact fraudulent files that Charles discovered 6 months ago. He knew you were attempting to forge his signature to bail out your failing company." My mother gasped, and my brother's face instantly flushed a deep, panicked red. Before my dad could even attempt to lie his way out of it, the lawyer opened the bright red file containing the true final will that Uncle Charles had executed just 2 weeks before his sudden passing. "Your father didn't just protect his assets," the lawyer continued, reading the clinical legal text aloud. "He set a massive financial trap. Charles heavily leveraged the exact corporate properties and luxury real estate you've been trying to steal. The core business empire you just claimed through these fraudulent papers is actually tied to a massive $2 million debt. According to the strict legal clauses of this contract, whoever aggressively claims ownership of those specific assets instantly assumes full, personal liability for the crushing debt attached to them." The sudden realization hit my family like a physical blow, instantly shattering their decades of unearned arrogance. My dad collapsed heavily back into his chair, staring blankly at the table as his grand plans for a multi-million-dollar payday vanished into thin air. The lawyer turned the page of the true will, his voice steadying as he revealed the rest of Uncle Charles's brilliant strategy. The true, untouched fortune, amounting to over $5 million securely held in protected offshore accounts, clear property titles, and a massive life insurance policy, had been left entirely and exclusively to me. Charles had included a highly specific clause granting me absolute authority over the distribution of the estate, meaning I held total power over my family's financial future. They looked at me with wide, terrified eyes, their synthetic sympathy completely replaced by desperate pleading. My brother began stammering an apology, while my mother reached across the table, begging me to remember that we were still a family. I simply looked down at them from where I stood in my military dress uniform, feeling absolutely no pity. Because my dad had aggressively insisted under legal record that his fraudulent partnership papers were valid, he had legally signed himself and his failing company directly into the debt-ridden side of the estate. I calmly slid the final transfer documents across the mahogany table toward his shaking hands. I gave them exactly the inheritance they had demanded: a mountain of crushing debt, immediate corporate foreclosure, and absolute financial ruin. 3 months later, the dust has finally settled completely. My biological parents filed for bankruptcy, losing their luxury home and assets, while my brother now works an entry-level job just to survive. They wanted a quick fortune, but their deep greed entirely destroyed them. Meanwhile, I used Uncle Charles' true $5 million inheritance to establish a special foundation dedicated to helping displaced youth, sheltering vulnerable teenagers who, just like I was at 16, were cruelly abandoned by the very people supposed to protect them. His real legacy lives on beautifully through the lives we are changing every single day. Now, I have a serious question for all of you listening to my story today. What would you have done if your own parents treated you this way? Let me know in the comments below. And meanwhile, I am leaving 2 other channel favorite stories on the final screen.